We're so happy to have Global Autism Center presenting today. This is Caitlin on our screen, even though it says Anna. So she's going to introduce herself. And if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A or in the chat. You can send them to the panelists most easily through the Q&A. All right, I'll let Caitlin go ahead and introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name's Caitlin Penner. I'm excited to give this talk as part of the Nurturing Know-How series on Let's Talk, how to create opportunities to foster the language and socialization of young children. I'll start out with introducing myself. I'm a graduate student in education at UCSB, and I work at the Kegel Autism Center. I'm also a board certified behavior analyst. So I work providing behavior supports to young children. Most of the children have autism, and so I do that as well. But I'm excited to talk to you guys about this topic tonight. And as Holly said, if you have questions, put them in the chat or the Q&A, and then if I don't see them, Holly, you can kind of point them out as well. If they relate to some of the specific slides we're talking about, I can answer them during that time, and then we can always get to the rest of them at the end as well. So just starting to talk a little bit about our center, the Kegel Autism Center partners with the autism community to promote hope, compassion, inclusivity, and empowerment. Like I said, we're located on the campus of UC Santa Barbara. Our mission is to provide interventions and services, provide collaborative partnerships such as this one with the library. We seek to be culturally sensitive, provide ongoing outreach and education, support the diverse needs of individuals with autism across the lifespan. So we work with children, adults, adolescents, toddlers through our different programs. And then we seek to be a model for excellence in research and training. And then if you're interested in learning more about some of these things that we do, you can Google us and go to our website to find out more about that if you're interested or kind of seeking out some of these services.
Caitlin, I just want to let you know that right now we can also see your slide notes. So I don't think that there's really a way to...
I looked up how to do this and it told me... Here, hold on. It told me this would work.
Okay, I now only see that.
Okay, I took it away. I don't really need them. It's fine. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, so I just want to start a little bit by talking about child development, and then we'll get into talking about a little bit about autism, and then maybe what most of you came here for, kind of some strategies to promote communication skills and socialization in young children. So you'll see here this roadmap for child development. It kind of just lists some of the main milestones that your child will be meeting around these benchmarks. But I do want to point out that, of course, child development varies from child to child. And so this is just kind of a guideline of around the age that your child may meet some of these things. So in the first 6 months, they'll start to copy sounds, begin to sit without support. They'll start showing some interest in other people, mostly their parents. They will begin to respond to their name. They'll string vowels together, kind of this babbling. And then in the first year, they'll copy gestures like waving, respond to simple spoken requests, start to say things like mama and dada, standing, and then as time goes on, they'll start to walk alone. You can see that's in the 18-month range. They'll start to understand common items like what a telephone is. They may start to engage in pretend play. They'll point to show other people something. They'll start saying single words. And then as we get into the second year, they'll start stringing words together to form sentences. They show interest and get excited about playing with other kids. They'll start to do things like kick a ball, follow simple instructions from adults, point to things to show things that they know, like when something is named, they'll be able to point to it. Then in the 3-year range, they'll start to copy adults and friends doing things like running. When they see other children running, they'll be able to start carrying on a conversation, like a short conversation. They can climb. They show affection for friends without prompting. And then as they get to about 4 years old, they can hop and stand on one foot. They can tell stories. They can draw a person, play cooperatively with others. And so you can kind of see how these things build on each other so that they're learning more complex skills. And of course, you can find more resources similar to this one that kind of has a longer list of developmental things that your child will be doing. And of course, this is a guide. Obviously, if your child is 6 months and hasn't done some of those things, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Development varies across children. But sometimes when we see that maybe development is not following the path that we saw on the last slide, this may be an indication of something else. And so autism spectrum disorder is something that may be the case for your child or for another child. And so I just want to talk a little bit about that and some of the early symptoms that are kind of indicative of autism. So you can kind of pick up on these things if that is the case. So autism is a developmental disability characterized by 2 things, social communication impairments, and then restrictive and repetitive behaviors and interests. And there's a tremendous variability in presentation across individuals. And so no 2 people with autism is the same. They're not going to act in the same way. There's variability in intellectual functioning. And so some people with autism may also have an intellectual disability, but some people may be far above average in intellectual functioning. And so there's tremendous variability in how this presents. Autism is more diagnosed in boys than girls, but we see it across all races and ethnic backgrounds. And then I'm going to go through some early symptoms, but I kind of want to put a little disclaimer out there before I get into these. Because there's a diagnostic criteria for autism, some of these things are framed more in like a deficit-based model. But we want to point out that there are a lot of strengths with individuals with autism, and at our center, particularly among other centers, we like to kind of focus on these strengths and kind of use a strength-based model. But for the sake of this presentation, we're kind of listing some of the early symptoms. And so they're kind of described in maybe this more deficit, from this deficit viewpoint, but that's not necessarily how we view it. It's just kind of how it's portrayed when we're looking at early symptoms. So I just want to kind of mention that before I get into it. So some of the early symptoms of autism as it relates to social communication impairments, the child may have difficulty with or does not respond to their name. They may not point to objects to show interest or follow another person's point. So like joint attention, they're not showing other people things to kind of get that mutual enjoyment, or they're not looking at things that other people are showing them. They may not show eye contact. It may appear that they don't understand other people's feelings, or they may not use gestures such as waving, blowing, kissing, clapping, those types of things that you see in young children. You may also observe some other things like delayed speech and language. They may repeat or echo words or phrases instead of maybe answering the question. There may be a flat or restricted facial expression, or they're not maybe demonstrating some of the facial expressions that you might expect. They might have more interest in toys than people, or a preference to play alone, difficulty relating to other people, or they may not engage in pretend play. And so you can see some of these are a little bit different to the developmental map that we showed you before. So they're on a little bit of a different developmental track. And then we have early symptoms of autism as it relates to restrictive and repetitive behaviors. So they may have repetitive motor movements or speech. So lining up toys, echoing other people's words, repeating phrases from TVs or movies, maybe at an inappropriate time, hand flapping, body rocking, pacing, spinning, toe walking, those types of things. They may have an insistence on sameness, so kind of a rigidity to transitions, or small changes may cause more distress than you might expect. Or when routines change, there may be more distress, or there's little variation in their play themes, that it's kind of this, it could be the same thing over and over. And then they may have intense and unusual interests. So they may only talk about interests that they like and not be able to engage in conversation or discussion around things that maybe other people want to talk about. And then sometimes individuals with autism have sensory sensitivities, like they don't like loud sounds, may only want to wear clothes of a certain texture, or avoid physical contact. And so now that I've kind of discussed development a little bit, I want to discuss some resources that can help support your child's development. And so these are relevant to our area in Santa Barbara, but there are other resources if you're tuning in from somewhere else that you can seek out as well. So if your child is, and these first three slides that I'm going to talk about are not specific to autism. They're resources to use if you're concerned about your child's development in any way. So these resources are relevant to children 0 to 3. So Tri-Counties Regional Center offers early start services. And this is for any child under 3 where the child might have a language delay or social emotional differences. They may have behavior difficulties, motor skills delay, sensory issues, or it could possibly be autism. And these services are free or very low cost. You can self-refer by contacting Tri-Counties, or your pediatrician might refer you to them. And if your child qualifies, the family would receive an individualized family service plan. And this is just kind of a plan that outlines what services you and your child are going to be receiving to kind of address some of these developmental concerns that you have. And so sometimes the services are occupational therapy or physical therapy. They have child development specialists that could come work with your child. Sometimes they contract with ABA providers to provide more behavioral support for your child. So it just depends on what your child's individualized needs are. And then the plan will be created to kind of address these if your child qualifies. So they'll do kind of initial assessment to determine what services would be appropriate. And the website is right there if you want to access that as well. And then unfortunately, when your child turns 3, they no longer qualify for those early start services kind of aimed at early intervention. But if your child is between 3 and 5 or before they go to kindergarten, you can contact your local school district for an educational assessment. And your child may qualify for an individualized education plan or an IEP. And this is kind of similar to the IFSP, the Individualized Family Service Plan that I discussed on the last slide. But it's kind of geared more towards specific supports for your child instead of the family as a whole. And it's kind of in preparation to support them in the school environment, academically, socially, whatever the kind of supports they would need to be successful in that environment. And so you can contact the local school district, whichever district that you're in, you can contact them and request this educational assessment. And then the same thing is true for if your child is school aged. So if your child is already in kindergarten or above, you can contact your school in writing and see if your child may qualify for an IEP. Again, they'll need to do some assessment to determine if your child does qualify. But if you feel that your child needs those additional supports, you can reach out to them to seek that out. And again, they would qualify for an IEP, which is just an individualized plan to support them in the school setting. Now we have some autism-specific resources for evaluations. So if you do think that your child may have autism, but you're not sure, you can seek out an evaluation. We do these at the Kegel Autism Center Assessment Clinic. So you can find that online as well, more information about that. And then also in the Santa Barbara area, Dr. Laura Seisus at Cottage Hospital also provides these evaluations. And like I said, we're located at UCSB. Dr. Seisus is located at the building in front of Cottage Hospital in Goleta. One thing, Dr. Laura Seisus accepts insurance, and so your insurance can help you with the cost of this evaluation. And then if your child does get a diagnosis of autism, or maybe they already have one, I listed some resources here that you can seek out to kind of support your child. So at the Kegel Autism Center, we have what we call our multi-day program. Right now it's being offered via telehealth due to COVID. And it's a week-long consultation program where we work with you to kind of learn strategies on how to support your child's skill development and address challenging behaviors using naturalistic strategies that are proven by research. And so this is a week-long program where we work with you. Sometimes it's extended to 2 weeks if you're not able to do 2 sessions a day, but typically we do a week where we do an hour in the morning where we're working with the parent, and then an hour in the afternoon where the parent is working with the child and we're giving some in vivo coaching to help you work with your child and teach them new skills. So that's kind of a shorter program. In the future, we'll be returning to in-person for that as well. We just don't have a date on that right now. It's being provided online. If you're looking for something more long-term or like an ongoing behavioral intervention plan for your child, you can seek out applied behavior analysis services. And Star of California is one agency in town that provides these ABA services to children with autism. And they also use the same naturalistic strategies that we use at the Kegel Center. And so that's kind of why they're listed here. But there are other providers as well. And so now I'm going to get into more of the strategies that you guys can use with your child to improve their communication and socialization skills. So starting with communication, some children just need a little bit of extra support in developing communication and language skills. And so these strategies are specifically geared towards the children that may not be learning them as naturally. Oftentimes we see children engaging in challenging behaviors maybe more than we might expect because there is a delay in communication. So if they don't have a means to express to you what they want and what they need, then they're going to maybe resort to challenging behaviors that are going to work for them. So maybe you might see more crying or grabbing at things because they don't necessarily have the language to express to you their wants and needs. And so teaching these communication skills can help replace these challenging behaviors. And so when we do teach these skills, we see that these challenges, the crying or whatever it may be, kind of goes down on its own because there's not a need for it anymore. They've learned the skills to replace that. Also, if this is the case for your child, it's important to remember that the child is not engaging in these challenging behaviors on purpose. There could be a skill deficit that's making it so that they're engaging in these challenging behaviors. And so that's something to keep in mind as we're teaching these new skills. When we think about communication, we think about expressive communication skills and receptive communication skills. So expressive communication skills are how your child tells you what they want and need, how they express themselves to you. Whereas receptive communication skills are kind of how they understand what you're telling them. And so some expressive communication skills you might want to work on with your child are requesting items, refusing items. So maybe requesting juice. Maybe they're just you're teaching them to say juice, or you're teaching them to say, can I have juice, depending on their age and level. Or refusing items would be like, no, I don't want juice right now, or no, no thanks, those types of things. And then it also includes answering questions. So what do you want? The child can indicate what they want by responding back expressively. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are kind of some of the main ones. And then the receptive communication skills are things like following a direction, responding to their name. And so you're saying something, and then they're required to respond back, not necessarily expressively, but in some sort of way to indicate that they understood you. And so we can work on both of these skills through the strategies that I'm going to talk about next. But first, I want to start out with a little bit of background. So we know that children learn faster when we incorporate a few things. So we know children learn faster when we incorporate their interests and their choices. If we incorporate interests and choices, the child's motivation is going to be higher than if we kind of just arbitrarily pick activities that we think they might like, but they don't really like. And so when we pick things that they like, or let them choose the activity that we're going to do together, their motivation goes up, which then creates more learning opportunities. You can think of a time that your child was playing with something they really like. Of course, they probably played with it for much longer than maybe a time that you introduced an activity that they just disengaged from quickly, and you kind of understood that they didn't like that activity as much. And so as they engage in activities longer, there's going to be more ways for us to create learning opportunities throughout that activity. And then also we want to think about blending a mix of lessons. So doing some easy things and some hard things. This is another way that we keep a child's motivation higher so that we can create more learning opportunities. If we think about ourselves, even, it's not sustainable to do things that are really difficult for us or really new for us all day long, every day. And so children are the same way. It's important that we work on things that they already know how to do, while also introducing new things that they're just learning how to do, so that we're kind of balancing motivation with learning. So they're going to stay motivated for longer because we're not doing hard, but we're also introducing these new and harder tasks because we want them to learn, of course. And then we want to make sure there's enough opportunities for them to feel successful. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the first three, because when the child's motivation is higher, there's going to be more opportunities for them to learn within these activities and interactions with us. And so that's kind of lays the groundwork for us on how to teach our children new things. But the actual implementation, we like to think about in terms of this ABC sequence. So sounds pretty easy. The A is the first part. So we think about, A stands for antecedent. And so basically that just means that that's what the adult does. So what does the adult do to signal the start of a teaching sequence? Then the B is the behavior. That's what the child does, how the child responds to us when we kind of create this learning opportunity for them. And then the C is the consequence. How do we as the adult then respond to the child's behavior to signal that, yes, that was something that I was trying to teach you. And so I'm going to give you something so that you learn that was a good response. Or maybe there wasn't a good response. And so there is the consequence is something different to indicate that wasn't the correct response that we were looking to teach them. And so that'll make a little more sense when I give this example. So if I'm the parent and I have a ball, I say ball. That's the A. That kind of signals the start of a teaching opportunity for the child. The child says ball, then the child gets the ball. So I, as the adult, start the teaching opportunity by modeling ball. The child says ball, I give them the ball. So the child then accesses that object in order to contingent upon them saying ball. And so they kind of learn how language works. When I say something, something happens. Or when I say something, I get access to something I want. And so we can break down really any language interaction into this ABC sequence where one person says something, another person said something, and then there's a response from the other person depending on what the person said in the middle. And of course, we know that if we're teaching our child something new, if we're teaching them language at the beginning, they're not necessarily going to be able to say ball the first time. They may say buh, and that's okay. We can then still give them the ball because we can't expect them to be perfect right from the beginning. And so that's important to remember as well. We're not going to withhold the ball until they're able to say a perfect word. If my child is just learning words and I expect them to say ball the first time I try this, it's just not realistic. They kind of have to practice over time. And so we can kind of loosen our expectations so that we're reinforcing their good attempts. So if they're clearly trying to say ball, then we give them the ball so that they learn language equals access to things that I want. Yeah, and then if your child doesn't say anything at all, then it may be you need to hold out for them to make some sort of attempt at vocalization in order to get access to the ball. Because if we give it to them, even though they're not saying anything, then they're not learning that those kind of principles of language that when I say something, I get something. They're just learning that they can have it if parent offers it. So it's important for them to learn that language equals access versus I'm just getting free access. They may not make that connection anytime soon because you're providing that access to the ball, regardless of what they say. Same thing with like challenging behavior. So if your child is crying, we don't want to give them the ball for that because then they learn that, oh, if mom says ball and I cry and then she gives me the ball. And so they're just really learning the opposite of what we want, that they can get access to the ball for crying. And so we're kind of trying to change this where it's replacing the crying with the vocalization. Also, I want to point out too, going back to the last slide, that we want to pick an activity that the child likes. And so this would be a good ABC to use for a child who really likes to play with balls. But if my child likes something else, I can kind of substitute ball for whatever the item or activity is. Another example, it doesn't always have to be modeling the word. Maybe I'm teaching my child to answer questions. So the parent could say, what do you want? That's the A. That signals the start of a teaching opportunity. Then we wait for a child's response. So if I say, what do you want? The child says bubbles. Then the consequence is that the adult blows bubbles for them. And so it sounds very simple, this series of ABCs, but this is really how children learn. They get reinforced for engaging in these new behaviors or these new language skills. And then over time, that kind of solidifies because they wanted access to the bubbles. So when they said bubbles, they got access. And so they're learning that saying bubbles means I get access. And over time, with lots of interactions like these, their language skills are going to develop because they're going to understand this back and forth. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about social development. So a lot of the same principles apply, and you'll see that. I'll break that down for you. You may be curious to learn how you can teach your child social skills. So some things like turn taking, sharing, cooperative play. Cooperative play is just kind of two people playing together, kind of going towards a common goal, such as in this picture. Looks like they might have built that together, and then they're both putting the ball in and watching it go down together. And so they're working together towards a common goal. And these are just a few. Obviously, there are other things that you may be wanting to teach your child as well, like conversational skills or things like that, if you have an older child or their language is more developed. But we'll kind of use these as examples. And like I said, we can use the same principles to promote socialization as we do communication. So the same ABC sequence applies, but we just kind of focus more on embedding social components into these exchanges so that we're creating a more natural social context for the children to learn socialization skills as well. And so I'll start with talking about promoting socialization between you and your child, and then we'll kind of build up to talk about how you can use these principles to promote socialization between your child and other peers, or your child and their sibling as well. So we want to first start by brainstorming social activities. And so how can we make an activity social? We can think about inherently social activities such as tag, for instance. That requires two people, of course. And so a child cannot do that by themselves. So those types of activities are great. Or we can think of how we can modify maybe activities that can be done individually to make it a social activity. And so we can do this by maybe animating toys and objects. So if a child likes to play with their car independently, then maybe we can add a silly voice to the car so that the child is really seeking out that activity with the car because they want the silly voice. So it requires a second person to come in. We can use silly voices and songs. So singing with your child or using, like I said, a silly voice to add to the activity that they may be doing by themselves. We can incorporate physical play, like in the picture. The child cannot do that by himself, obviously, and so those types of activities are great. Other examples of this are like tickling, maybe spinning the child around in a chair, lifting them up and down, those types of things. Those are great. And then we can think about enhancing an existing social activity. So like I said, how can we as the adult make the activity that they're engaging in independently way better if we're engaging with them? So if they learn that when there's a second person involved, the activity gets more fun and I enjoy it more, so that they're going to be more likely to seek out that social activity over that individual activity in the future. And so this could be, for example, if a child likes to play with the car, like I said, can we then add in like building a ramp for the car, or making the car go faster, or bringing in another car and racing them? How can we kind of improve the activity so that it's better with what they're doing? So building upon something that they're already interested in. And like I said, do it better than the child can do it. So oftentimes, like, we can, as the adult, can do more things, like we can lift the child up higher than maybe they're able to jump on the trampoline, or we can bounce the ball much higher than them. And so they might like that and then seek you out to be able to do that, because they can't necessarily do it on their own. And so once we kind of brainstorm activities that we're either making to be more social or that are inherently social, we want to test it out with our child. So this goes back to the child choice part, and incorporating their interests. Something that you do with your child that you think they might really like, they might not, or you might do something and they might really like it. And so it's important to test it out with them instead of just assuming they're going to like it, because children, of course, have their own preferences. And so when we're testing it out, we want to use positive facial expressions and tone of voice to kind of indicate this is something fun, and kind of be more welcoming to the child, that they might want to engage with you in this activity. We want to be playful. The more playful we are, typically the more engaged the child is going to be with you. If we're just sitting there kind of passively playing with them, they're not going to be getting the same thing out of it as if you are very engaged with them, being very playful, doing all kinds of silly things with your child. They're going to be more likely to kind of seek you out and be engaged with you if you're engaging with them fully. And we have to kind of go in with the idea that not everything will work, especially when we're adding things to additional activities that they might already be playing. If we try, for instance, to add a silly voice or build a ramp for the car that the child is playing with independently, and they don't really like it, they may actually still find that them playing with the car on their own is better. And so we kind of have to go in with the idea that it might not work, and I might have to try something again. I try things all the time with kids that I think they might love, and they end up not liking it. And so that's okay. We can just try something else. And this is kind of where creativity comes into play too. How can we get creative when things don't work to kind of create something better that they may actually like? And then also a little side note as well, if it doesn't work and they don't like it, don't try to force it. This goes back to the child choice thing. if they don't like it, they don't like it. That's okay. We can spend our time looking for something else. Thinking about how we can attempt variations that build off an identified interest. And so starting with something like a character, cartoon character, or maybe a song that they really like, that you're like, I don't know how to create learning opportunities within this. Them playing with the one stuffed animal that they really like, or the one character that they really like. But how can we then maybe create a new activity that's related to that? Can we play a game that has that character in it? Or can we color a picture with that character in it, where maybe it's a more social activity, but we're kind of using that interest to kind of engage them with that new activity or this improved activity that is maybe more social and can create more opportunities for social interaction. And then, like I said, try again. If it doesn't work, that's okay. We can find something else. Not every child is going to like physical play, for instance, and so they may not like to be touched. We have to try something else where we don't use that. Or maybe the child really does like that, and so we try a bunch of variations of physical play to create these social interactions. So then we go back to our ABC, so we can break it down for you guys to kind of see how these interactions should play out. The parent says, and so I'm going to start with the same example of the ball, so you can kind of see the difference in promoting communication only versus like promoting communication within social interaction to then simultaneously teach social engagement with communication. So if the parent says ball, the child says ball, and then the parent and child play catch together. And so that catch activity that is reinforcing the child for saying ball is more social than me just handing over a ball to the child for them to play alone. And so we're teaching the child that socialization is fun, but we're also teaching them this communication skill with it. That's not necessarily to say that the first example that I gave, where we're just working on that communication, is wrong. It's just this also teaches social skills at the same time. And so, of course, it will only work if your child enjoys playing catch with you. But this consequence can be changed to any social activity with the ball that may be motivating for your child. So a parent, for another example, the parent says ball, the child says ball, maybe I throw the ball on the roof and then the ball comes down. Maybe the child really likes that. That still requires you as the adult to be there. So it still requires that social interaction, but maybe it's what your child likes over at this playing catch activity. And so that's where this idea of child choices continues to be important. Another example, if we're thinking about turn taking, a social skill that I mentioned at the beginning of this section. If the parent prompts the child to say, I want a turn, and then the child asks for a turn, the consequence is that they get a turn and get to continue playing their favorite game. And so they learn that continuing to play their favorite game, in order to continue to play their favorite game, they have to take turns. And so they're learning this turn taking skill while they're also getting to enjoy this activity with you that they really like. And so, of course, if we're thinking about turn taking, we obviously want to start with a game or activity that the child really likes. So letting them pick from a variety of games, or letting them pick maybe coloring, and then we're taking turns with the markers or things like that, depending on their interests. And so here are some more examples that kind of go in the ABC, go along with the ABCs, but just kind of a longer list of how we can create social opportunities. So if the child is bouncing on the trampoline and the child says jump, if we're just working on that communication, the child is then given the opportunity to jump on the trampoline. But if we're also looking to create this socialization opportunity, then the child requests jump, the parent and child can jump together. If the child enjoys listening to a preferred song on the TV and they request music, just kind of working on communication, the parent will then start the video and then the child gets to hear the preferred song. So they're learning that they can request the song. But if we're kind of trying to pair social interaction, then the parent can sing the preferred song to the child. So it requires the parent to be present for that. If they enjoy playing on a preferred swing, the child requests swing. The child is given the opportunity to swing independently with kind of just focusing on communication. But then if we're focusing on social, the parent then pushes the child, and it's this nice back and forth social engagement. And so as I go through these, you might be starting to think about some things that your child likes and how you can kind of modify them to create these social interactions. You can do it in the bathtub. The child requests splash. The child is given the opportunity to splash around. That could be used as the reinforcement, or we can use this more social activity where we're then splashing with the child. And so on that note too, with the bathtub example, these things that we're talking about today, they can be used at any time, in any setting. You can create a learning opportunity. So it's something you can do throughout your day, or maybe you set aside time to play with your child where you're working on this specific skill. But really, that's what makes these strategies great, is that we can use them anytime, anywhere. So I can do it at the park. I can do it playing with my child at home. I can do it when we go to the grocery store even, or in other natural routines like the bathtub, getting dressed, those types of things, eating a snack, where I can create these learning opportunities embedded in their day that makes it more feasible to kind of teach them these new skills for you. And then the last example, playing with a blanket, the child requests blankets. You may give them a blanket and they can wrap themselves, but to create a social engagement or social opportunity, the parent might wrap the child in the blanket and squeeze them tight or something like that. Yeah, so this just gives you some more examples, but I think it kind of a good takeaway activity for you guys to do is kind of maybe modify this list on your own to activities that your child really likes, so that you can start thinking about how these apply to your day-to-day life. And then we're going to talk lastly about how you can promote socialization between your child and peers. And so obviously socialization between you and your child is so important, but eventually you're going to want your child to play with other peers independently. And so this, again, the same principles can apply. They just need to be modified a little bit. Child choice and incorporating a child's interest is still really important. So we want to select activities that your child likes, but also that the peer likes. We know that friendships are kind of formed when we have something in common with somebody else, or we have a mutual interest. And so the same thing is true for kids. So picking something that they both like so that they're both going to stay engaged. If your child stays engaged, but the peer doesn't, then you lose the social interaction, and vice versa. We want to pick activities that promote engagement between the two children. So basically activities that can't be done alone, and activities that require cooperation, teamwork, or some sort of back and forth interaction. So it could be a game. It could be activities with multiple pieces work really well. So if it's like coloring, I can give half the markers to one kid, half the markers to the other, so that they're required to kind of request the markers from each other when they need them. Same thing with like blocks, I can split them up. It might be helpful to familiarize the children with the activity beforehand. So especially if it's like a new game or we're working on a new skill, the children maybe both are learning to take turns. It's a good idea to kind of, depending on the child's age and development level, of course, just kind of give them some background, like, okay, we're going to play this new game, but in order to play this new game, we have to remember to take turns with each other. So-and-so is going to take a turn, and then you're going to take a turn. And so just kind of giving them some expectations and kind of like laying the ground rules for what we're trying to teach them. And then, of course, we're using this as an opportunity to practice these social skills. So is it turn taking? Are we practicing sharing? Are we practicing requesting items from other children? What's kind of the focus here? So we can think about that ahead of time. And then depending on what it is, depending on which skill it is, that kind of informs what activities might be good for that. Because of course, requesting items from other kids, pretty much any activity can work, but maybe turn taking, it requires a game or a shorter list of activities where that may be possible. And then these things might require adult facilitation at first. And the adult facilitation is important for a couple reasons. Of course, you may have to prompt your child to request something, or if they're still learning that social communication, you may have to prompt them in order to get them to do the skill. But also it's important because we may need to prompt the other peer to then reinforce them. When we're following the ABCs, we're kind of in control. We know that when the child responds with what we're looking for, it's important to reinforce them and give them access to the item or engage with them in that social activity in order to teach them that that's what we expected. But children may not always follow that. And so it's important for the adult to kind of make sure that when your child requests a turn, that the other child is then giving them a turn and vice versa, so that they're both learning this back and forth interaction. And that when if your child's learning to request a turn, but the other child is not giving it to them when they say my turn, then the child learns that, okay, well, when I say my turn, that doesn't really work. And so it's important to kind of be there just to kind of facilitate at first. Obviously, the end goal is for us to kind of fade back and the children to be able to play independently. But at first, this is often required. And then another strategy that you can use is that you can start with practicing these skills with you before practicing them with peers. So maybe your child has a play date with a new friend. And so you know that turn taking is something that they're learning, but that's something that's going to be important when the friend comes over, or something that you want to work on when the friend comes over. And so maybe you play that turn taking game with your child ahead of time. Then your child is kind of already aware of the expectations around it, and they're going to be more likely to engage in that skill when the peer comes into play. And again, you can use these with siblings as well. A lot of parents have goals for their children to play together, and so you can use these strategies to facilitate those types of interactions too. And so the same ABCs apply, but when we're thinking about facilitating with other peers, we want to make sure that we set up ahead of time. So we know both kids love playing with cars. So if the adult gives half the ramp pieces to one friend or all the ramp pieces to one friend and all the cars to the other friend, then in order to play that activity, they need to request items from each other. So there's this setup ahead of time to kind of set the environment up to practice these skills. Otherwise, the children might just play with their respective cars independently. So then the parent might prompt the child to ask for a ramp from his friend. The child says, "Ramp, please." And then the other child gives him the ramp piece, and they get to watch the car go down the ramp together. And so this consequence is really this social activity that they're both getting to experience. But again, it might be important for the adult to prompt at the beginning and then also prompt at the consequence to make sure that the other child is giving him the piece that's needed to complete this activity. A few key points to remember, some takeaways that are really important to working on communication and social skills. Incorporating your child's interests and choices into learning is so important. It's really easy for parents to kind of get wrapped into like, well, I feel like they should like this activity, or they really used to like this activity, but it's important to go off what your child is really motivated for right now. And we can think about long-term, that's just going to be more beneficial if we're able to incorporate these interests. We're going to be able to create many more learning opportunities than we would without. Remember to practice both hard and easy tasks with your child. This helps avoid frustration and keeps motivation high. And then be patient. It can take time for children to learn new skills, and that's okay. I know sometimes when we're first teaching kids new skills, we're so excited about it. And then it can get frustrating if we're not seeing immediate progress, or you might think, oh, I'm not implementing these strategies in the way I should because my child's not showing immediate progress. But it's important to kind of be patient and remember that all children kind of learn at their own pace. And so these strategies will kind of push them along to learn these skills, but it can take time. Thanks, everyone.